Well, my single idea is that one essential component of change needed for secure and sustainable freedom for the British people is a much more federal system of governance. Now for the 5 reasons. My first reason is my friend Harold Ellertson, who sadly and unexpectedly died a few weeks ago. Harold came from a long line of Lancastrians, and over several years, he and I had many discussions and overwhelming agreement about a federal UK, Brexit, Putin's infiltration of the Conservative Party, and similar issues. On Monday, visiting his part of Lancashire, north of Blackpool, for his funeral, I felt and saw even more why he was so sure Lancastrians need a better model of government. Harold had been a Conservative MP for Blackpool in the 1990s, but he later became increasingly concerned by the failure of the current highly centralised British political settlement to deliver either economic well-being or reliable freedoms, particularly for his fellow Lancastrians. In 2015, in the dying days of the Cameron-Clegg coalition, he set up the Northern Party. In the event, the supposedly, but not in reality, independent electoral commission's unlawful bias, and it was unlawful, kept both his Northern Party and my more London-based party off the ballot paper for the 2015 general election. Even worse than that, we found no one in Parliament who gave a damn. Harold's localism partly looked back to a more hierarchical past, particularly before the Victorian period, when government was much smaller and mostly very local indeed. But having lived for most of the last 20 years in the Federal Republic of Germany, Harold saw at first hand how federalism in a modern state produces better outcomes for the citizens that government is supposed to serve. So my own understanding of federalism in the context of the needs of Northern England, for which he had great plans, by the way, is much reinforced by years of discussion with Harold. My second reason is freedom. President Lincoln stated in his Gettysburg Address that the way to honor those who died in the American Civil War was to have a new birth of freedom with government of the people, by the people, for the people. And his commendable aspiration was very soundly based. The novelty, complete novelty, of an entire British Parliament elected by fair votes would be one essential component of freedom. But so is the ability to have one's voice heard on local issues. England's political system may deliver for party hacks, but it fails to deliver participatory democracy for local residents. All of us who watch American films time and again see how engaged people are with local government. And they're engaged precisely because they know that their engagement improves their neighborhood. But despite the vanity of propaganda through the centuries, England's conception of freedom has, particularly since 1066, been somewhat muted. Its most reliable focus through the centuries has been the freedom to make money. And it's true, the freedom to have exotic sex has risen in recent decades, and mutual tolerance has in some ways improved. But set against that, this has been accompanied by more constraints on freedom of speech and on freedoms associated with properly functioning public services. Brexit, made possible only by the current constitutional settlement, marked the largest peacetime state confiscation of individual rights in the UK's history. And the English in particular do need belatedly to accept that if we simply rely on others to deliver the polity we all need, then the system will tend to look too much after its own, too little on what we as citizens need and want. Freedom is harder work. It requires more effort from more people, and it is quite a big ask in the circumstances of modern life. But that people's effort will best be rewarded in a political system where as many political decisions as possible are taken as locally as possible. My third reason is prosperity. As a broad rule of thumb, when one looks at comparable countries, more federal systems deliver more prosperity. The UK manages to combine exceptional centralism with both low economic growth and high levels of disparity between haves and have-nots. Nearly all, about 95% of decisions in the UK about tax are made centrally, not locally. 95%. In other developed countries, you'd probably be looking more about 70%. About 80% of all public spending decisions in the UK are made centrally, not locally. That's 80%. Again, in other developed countries, you'd probably be looking at about 60%. So just by that simple measure, we're about 30% over-centralised. In the longer run, the north of England could expect to be more prosperous with more say over its own economy and public services. The GDP per person in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, very similar in size and characteristics to Northern England, is about 40% higher per person than in Northern England. So local communities and regions need to be empowered with money as well as with robust structures of government to fund defined public services. And that's going to need a transfer of a substantial part of the big taxes, income tax, VAT, and so on, away from Whitehall. My fourth reason is that federalism would better hold the UK together. In the time available, this reason is more unsubstantiated assertion than evidenced argument, but I believe a federal UK is more likely to stay together than one where Whitehall continues to control far too many levers of power. In a federal UK, local people would have far more power over the local services they most experience. And my fifth and final reason is that we would get on better with Ireland and with the EU with a federal structure of government. Every German with whom I have discussed this agrees that Germany's federal system of government makes it easier for the German people to accept and to understand EU membership. The Brexit campaign was based on lies. In truth, Brussels was never a problem for the British people. Our problem was homegrown. It was, and it remains, Whitehall. The Brexit lie of take back control had nothing to do with us as citizens. We all lost rights and we lost control to a central government that grabbed more power. With a more federal system of government, more British people would understand that meaningful sovereignty of the people within the European family is a far more valuable prize than, divorced from the European family, lock down Liberty Hall within central government. The end.